April 15, 1945. Just hours before the Red Army begins its final assault on Berlin, Hitler issues his final directive. Since the start of World War II, when the German leader issued his first directive, Hitler issued a total of 74 directives throughout the war. Known as Führer directives, they were instructions and strategic plans made by Adolf Hitler himself. They covered a wide range of topics, from the detailed direction of military units in World War II to the governance of occupied territories and their populations. These directives were completely binding and had to be followed to the letter, above all other laws. Some of the most important, before we get to the last, were the following. First, we have Directive Number 1, issued on August 31, 1939, in which Hitler ordered the attack on Poland. Between January and February 1940, Directive Number 10 was issued, in which the German leader approved the Yellow Plan, devised by Manstein, for the future invasion of France. On July 11, 1941, a few weeks after the start of Operation Barbarossa, the German leader wrote a very striking Directive Number 32, in which he established how the resources of the Soviet Union were going to be used after its imminent fall. On December 8, 1941, Hitler had to issue Directive Number 39, in which he ordered the cessation of all offensive actions in Russia, and shortly after, in March 1942, he issued Directive Number 40, in which he ordered the beginning of the construction of defenses on the Atlantic coast. Following continued defeats on the Eastern Front, Hitler was forced in November 1943 to issue Directive Number 51, in which he ordered that total priority be given to the Western Front in view of the imminent Allied invasion of France. On July 19, 1944, just one day before the assassination attempt, the German leader issued Directive Number 58, in which he gave instructions for the defense of the original territory of the Third Reich. A little later, in January 1945, Hitler wrote Directive Number 68, in which he completely eliminated the freedom of movement of any troop commander. From then on, any action at practically battalion level could not be ordered without his approval. And with this, we come to the directives on which we are going to focus in this program, being Directives Number 73 and 74, which were issued on April 15th, just hours before the Soviet offensive began. In anticipation of an imminent Soviet attack, which could cut off the German leader from the rest of Germany, on April 15, 1945, Hitler issued his 73rd directive. In the event that land communications are interrupted in central Germany, I order the following. First, in the separated zone in which I am not present, a commander-in-chief appointed by me will conduct all military operations and assume command of all forces of the three branches of the armed forces in the area in question. This includes troops present on all fronts, the Reserve Army, the Waffen-SS, the police, and other organizations attached to them. Second, if I myself were to find myself south of the interrupted communications, Admiral Dönitz would be appointed Commander-in-Chief in the Northern Zone. He will be assigned to the staff of operations as small as possible and will have to appoint the following new Commanders-in-Chief. A. Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Vistula, who will command the Eastern Front. B. Commander-in-Chief of the Northwest, who will command the Western Front. C. Commander of the Danish Armed Forces. D. Commander of the Norwegian Armed Forces. E. Commander-in-Chief of the Reich Air Fleet. Third, if I myself were to find myself north of the interrupted communications, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring would be appointed Commander-in-Chief in the Southern Zone. Under his command would be the following bodies. A. Commanders-in-Chief of Army Groups South and Center for the Eastern Front. B. Commander-in-Chief of Army Group G for the entire Western Front. C. Commander-in-Chief of the Southeast. D. Commander-in-Chief of the Southwest. E. Commander-in-Chief of the 6th Air Fleet. Fourth, the Commanders-in-Chief designated for the zones separated in paragraphs 2 and 3 shall carry out the general defense of the Reich in their zones, if necessary independently, in the event that my orders and decisions, including by radio, do not reach them in time due to the communication situation. They are personally responsible to me for the exhaustive use of their entire war potential in the closest cooperation with the Reich Commissioner for the Defense of the Separate Zone. Apart from this, as far as communications permit, the unified control of operations by me personally, as hitherto, will not be disturbed. In particular, the duty to provide daily reports will not be affected. The High Command of the Air Force and the Reichsführer SS, as the senior officer responsible for the military tasks of the Waffen-SS, will be informed of decisions as quickly as technical communication possibilities permit. And here are the directive ends. It should be noted that when Hermann Göring sent his telegram to Hitler, when he was surrounded in Berlin, the orders for each commander-in-chief to act in case the German leader was isolated were already issued with this directive. That is why his telegram was interpreted as an attempted coup d'etat. The next directive was issued on April 15th, quite unusually, being number 74. Unbeknownst to him or not, it would become known as the German leader's last directive during the war, and in it he wrote the following. Soldiers of the German Eastern Front. For the last time, our mortal enemies have launched their enormous forces into the attack. Their goal is to reduce Germany to ruins and exterminate our people. Many of you, soldiers from the East, already know the fate that threatens, above all, German women, girls, and children. While the elderly and children will be killed, women and girls will be reduced to barracks prostitutes. The rest will be sent to Siberia. We have foreseen this advance, and since January, we have done everything possible to build solid defenses in front of the Oder. The enemy will be met with massive artillery fire. The gaps in our infantry have been filled with countless new units. Our front is being reinforced by emergency units, newly created units, and the Volkssturm. This time, the Bolshevik will meet the old fate of Asia. He must bleed to death before the capital of the German Reich. Whoever does not do his duty at this time behaves like a traitor to our people. The regiment or division that abandons its position acts so shamefully that it must be ashamed of the women and children who resist the terror of the bombings in our cities. Above all, be on guard against the few traitorous officers and soldiers who, in order to preserve their miserable lives, fight against us in the pay of the Russians, perhaps even wearing German uniforms. Anyone who orders you to retreat, unless he knows you well personally, will be arrested immediately and, if necessary, killed on the spot, no matter what rank he may have. If every soldier on the Eastern Front does his duty in the days and weeks ahead of us, the final assault on Asia will fail. Berlin will remain German, Vienna will again be German, and Europe will never be Russian. Form a sworn brotherhood to defend, not the empty conception of a fatherland, but your homes, your wives, your children, and with them our future. In these hours, the entire German people look to you, my fighters in the East, and only hope that, thanks to your resolution and fanaticism, thanks to your weapons and under your leadership, the Bolshevik assault will be put down in a bloodbath. At this moment, when fate has removed from the earth the greatest war criminal of all time, the turning point of this war will be decided. Here concludes Hitler's last directive. It is understood that when he names the greatest war criminal of all time, the German leader is referring to the recently deceased President Roosevelt. The final assault on the German capital began a few hours later, during the early morning of April 16th. There, on the famous Seelow Hills, the 90,000 men of Buss's Ninth Army were able to hold out for about 3 days before the front was completely opened. From this point, Berlin began to be surrounded by the 1st and 2nd Belarusian fronts of Marshals Zhukov and Konev, respectively, leaving the capital completely isolated by April 23rd and 24. Inside, the last defenders of Berlin continued to fight in an encirclement that was shrinking as the hours passed, until finally Hitler was forced to commit suicide on April 30th. Regardless of the directives on April 20th and 22, Hitler drew up his last military plan to save the situation in Berlin. As we have already analyzed in other programs, the strategy consisted of the following. General Felix Steiner's units, which were designated as Army Group Steiner, were to attack in a southerly direction to cut off Zhukov's penetration from the north. At the same time, General Buss's divisions belonging to the Ninth Army, which were isolated south of Berlin in the Halbe Forest, were to attack northward to join up with Steiner. Finally, General Wenck's 12th Army, located west of Berlin, was to reach the city to finish breaking the encirclement from the west. Although it was not a bad plan on paper, it was completely impossible to carry out due to the total weakness of the last military units in Germany. Thus, the last plan ordered by Hitler was never carried out. Well, that's it for this program. I've left you 2 interviews about the Battle of Berlin in the description so you can continue analyzing it. See you next Sunday. See you soon.